Is your favorite anime overhyped? Let's talk about that. What's up, guys? It's your boy, and today we're going to be talking about a lot of different popular animes and just kind of their status as communities have given them, and what that means in relation to being overhyped. Because there's a lot of different anime that have a lot of different statuses in the anime community, and I kind of want to discuss some of the bigger names and why they're there. But before I do that, okay, yeah, you know what's coming at this point. Go ahead, click the buttons down below, the one that's the thumbs up, the like button, and then the one that's red and says subscribe. Helps me out a lot. Let's get straight into the content from here. First things first, when I talk about anime being overhyped, I want to make very clear that I don't mean that those anime are bad. Overhyped is just a term that is used to talk about these shows that might not live up to the expectations that they have. And the way that I'm going to kind of illustrate this point is by taking some of my anime list's top 100 shows, talking about why they are in the place that they are and whether they fall under that umbrella of overhyped. And I also want to make clear one other thing. Just because something is a masterpiece does not mean that it's popular, and vice versa. There are a lot of shows out there that are popular that don't necessarily fall under the umbrella of a masterpiece. And I think we'll talk about some of those shows, but really, I think the overall umbrella of things will fall under these shows that really kind of have attention from both areas, both masterpiece and popular areas, but maybe don't have the right positioning within all of that. When it comes to the top 100 shows of all time according to my anime list, which aggregates people's scores on a 1 to 10 basis, apparently I need to watch Gintama because it just sweeps everything. It doesn't miss. But even with that, there are some shows that I do think miss, or even some movies that I think miss. One interesting disparity that I found while researching this video and its topic was the difference between A Silent Voice and Spirited Away, which had way more of a disparity than I would have thought upon initially looking at the list. A Silent Voice is somewhere in like the top 10 to 15 range, and then Spirited Away is number something like 34, which is a pretty big disparity considering that Spirited Away actually won the Oscar for Best Animated Picture. Not foreign film or foreign animated picture, but Best Animated Picture at the US Oscars. This was an accomplishment that had never really even been heard of before, and the anime industry was not nearly as big as it is now. The impact that Spirited Away had on the anime industry was absolutely monumental, and yet people vote A Silent Voice as being higher up than Spirited Away. Is this necessarily a bad thing? No. Is A Silent Voice in this case being overhyped? Well, I would actually argue no. And it's interesting because you would think that with the amount of impact that Spirited Away had, you would think it obviously is not being hyped up enough in comparison to A Silent Voice, which should be way higher up and is way overhyped in comparison. But what they represent for their specific fields does matter, and A Silent Voice is actually kind of one of those movies that I think fits in the masterpiece category that gets the recognition that it deserves from the public later on down the road. Now, that's not to say that Spirited Away, once again, is not good. Spirited Away is a monumentally good film, and it deserves the place that it has at 34th, and I personally believe that with the impact that it has had, it should be higher. But it's interesting because you would think that the popularity of it would make it rise above A Silent Voice. But one case that I think everybody can agree was overhyped is one show that didn't break the top 50 despite hearing about it everywhere. And that's Chainsaw Man. And Chainsaw Man really does have a good premise, it really does have a good style, and the animation and the quality of the show itself is good. But it wasn't a 10 out of 10 show. And everybody knew that it wasn't a 10 out of 10 show. And so right now it sits at 72nd on my anime list. And don't get me wrong, that is a great placement. If you're in the top 100 anime of all time, according to an aggregate of people, you're doing pretty darn good. However, it had so much hype to it that the fact that it wasn't the highest rated show on my anime list at some point is really something that I think a lot of people weren't expecting. And even if it was at the very top spot, I'm not 100% sure. It might have hit there for a brief amount of time. It did not stay for very, very long. And it's because it didn't have the execution to the level that people wanted it. I mean, the fact that Kaguya-sama Love is War Ultra Romantic, the third season, had the top spot for longer than Chainsaw Man ever did and probably ever will, kind of shows the level of hype versus overhyped, where Kaguya-sama, that people were expecting it to be good, and then it lived up to those expectations, and to the point where fans raised it to the very top that it could be. Whereas Chainsaw Man, people saw it, and the expectations were really, really, really high, and people still did enjoy it, but not to the level that they were quite expecting. And that's why it has currently an 8.63 overall rating out of 10 on my anime list. Again, nothing to scoff at, but probably overhyped in the grand scheme of things. But let me talk about one that is a more kind of direct example and something that can be a lot better compared. And that is JoJo's, the final season of Part 6, because Part 6 was split up into 3 separate sections. Thank you, Netflix. Versus all of Part 5. The entire part. The whole thing. On my anime list currently, people have Part 6, the final part, the final section of Part 6, rated higher than all of Part 5. Now, don't get me wrong here. They are both very good, and I think the ending to Part 6 was the best ending of JoJo's there has been so far. The only one that comes close in my mind is the end of Part 3, which was very long. There was a lot of build-up in Part 3 to the ending, which ended up being spectacular. Similar story with Part 6, and because you have a smaller section of Part 6 with that final season, that third part of Part 6, you can make the case that it should deserve a really high score. And I would agree. I think that it was really solid, maybe an 8 or 9 out of 10. But Part 5, as a whole, what it did, I personally believe, was more impactful. You have more episodes, more depth, and just as good a story in a lot of aspects. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that the ending of Part 5 is as good as the ending of Part 6. I think Part 6 really nails the ending well. But as a whole, you could do a direct comparison of all of Part 6 and all of Part 5 and maybe have a little bit of a case, right? But you can't convince me that just a section of a season is better than all of Part 5. And I really think it's the case that even though they're both very good in their own right, people saw the ending of Part 6 and immediately gave it a 10 out of 10, and that's the reason why it's sitting higher up in the top 100 than the entirety of another part that was really about the same in animation quality and had a very, very good story in its own right. But let me talk about probably my most controversial opinion within all of this. And that is one that I think really kind of gets at the overall idea that I'm trying to convey here. And that is in the show Steins Gate. And Steins Gate is good. I think it's highly, highly, highly overrated. But I also think it is not surprising where it is in the top 10 anime of all time, according to my anime list. Hear me out here. Steins Gate is good. It has a really good plot, it has a good build-up, and it has a good conclusion, right? It really kind of goes full circle, tells its story, tells it well, and it is a satisfying show. It is good. I don't want to act like it's not. However, the reason why I think it's overhyped and is in the wrong place is because everybody thinks that it is good. And I think what I mean by that is that people see Steins Gate and they all agree that it is a very well put together show. And when people see that, when everybody kind of agrees that there's a really good show, they overinflate the score to make it seem like it's better than it actually is. And that's not to offend any Steins Gate fans out there who gave this show a 10 out of 10. I could absolutely see why this show deserves it. I personally have not seen Steins Gate 0, the follow-up, And if you gave Steins Gate a 10 out of 10, maybe based on the follow-up too, there might be some more depth in there, but judging Steins Gate by itself, there are a lot of stories that could probably compare and beat Steins Gate by itself, but it gained the popularity, and on top of gaining the popularity, it was able to capture the hearts enough to get an overinflated score that most shows can't beat because they don't have the mix of the popular vote getting the 10s and the 9s and the amount of people doing so. So you might have a niche masterpiece getting a bunch of 10 out of 10s, right? But it doesn't have a million people giving it a 10 out of 10. It has 50,000 people giving it a 10 out of 10. And in the overall aggregate ranking of things, that's not enough to compare with a show of the mass popularity that Steins Gate has. And this could apply to a myriad of different shows. You could make the case that Jujutsu Kaisen should be way higher, or you could make the case that Demon Slayer could be way, way lower. But I think that Steins Gate really kind of gets at that point, because when I saw Steins Gate, I liked it. I got through it, and I was like, that is a good show. But I also think that the reason why it's as high as it is because it is popular more than it is a absolute masterpiece. And that, I mean, I think that My Anime List actually does a pretty good job of having a lot of the masterpieces in that top 10, that top 20, that top 50 even. But I think that there's a few outliers that maybe shouldn't be as high up as they are, and I think the reasoning for that is the mass popularity in what would be considered being overhyped. Well, that's about it for me from today. I had to edit this video in basically the span of a single night. I've been kept busy by a lot of things, so if it's a little incoherent at times, I apologize. I tried to do it as well as I could. What will be coherent is the Japan vlogs. I'm trying to reach back and forth with my editor. I know I've brought it up like 3 videos now, but I know that you guys are waiting for those, and I want you guys to know that they're not in the back of my mind. They're in the front of my mind. We're getting them done, and they'll be out sooner than you guys expect. That all said, that's been Gelswick, and I will see you guys next time.